Hello, welcome to Notes to My Legal Self. The future belongs to builders. Together, we explore topics of interest to legal innovators. Know someone who'd make a great guest? Let us know. Self-nominations are encouraged. They're an act of courage. Want to get the most from this conversation? Ask questions, comment, like, follow, say hello. In short, engage. Lastly, have fun. Shaping the future of law requires significant effort, but finding joy in the process is essential. Let's begin. Here's your host, Olga Mack.
Well, hello, everyone. We're going to have an exciting conversation today. We're going to talk about authenticity, how to show up as yourself every time, especially in the age of AI. This series is part of this book roadshow. You might have heard we've written the book about 50 leaders in legal tech and future of law. I've written this book called Legal Operations in the Age of AI and Data. And I'm really excited to have one of the contributors on the show with us today. Hannah, welcome to Notes to My Legal Self. So excited to have this conversation with you. For those folks who haven't met you, please introduce yourself.
Oh, thank you, Olga. I'm so excited to be here to have this conversation with you as well today. So, my name is Hannah Beko. Always try not to start with, but still end up doing, starting with the fact that I'm a commercial property lawyer. That's what I've done the longest. I'm also co-owner of a law firm, and I also coach and train lawyers from about 8 years ago. So I have worked in a self-employed basis for the last 12 years, technically now having sort of 3 businesses. So I guess I sort of try to introduce myself as a bit of a portfolio career entrepreneur now. Maybe I get to say that with 3 businesses. I don't know.
I love that. You get to say whatever you want when it comes to your identity. That's part of being authentic. You can decide who you are and how you show up in the world. That's self-sovereignty in action. You contributed to this book. Thank you so much. You've written a chapter on authenticity. Not not at all surprising because that is your thing. Tell us a little bit more about why you think authenticity is so important, especially in this age of AI and data.
Yes. Well, if you don't mind, I'll do 2 little bits. So one bit, why I've been talking for years about authenticity being particularly important in law, and then why I think it's even more important in relation to the age of AI, of much more legal tech, and all the sort of topics that were covered in the book, which is why I know you've had lots of guests who said they were surprised to be invited to contribute towards the book. I was similarly, but actually the more I thought about it, the more important this was. So, the reason I've talked about authenticity in law for so many years is that when I reached sort of chronic stress, almost burnout point years ago myself, one of the things I learned looking back is that trying to be somebody else, trying to be who you thought a lawyer was, the way they dressed, the way they spoke, the things they talked about, their whole persona, trying to be that is something that traditionally the legal profession has done a lot of. And that's one of the reasons, as someone who specializes in mental health and well-being now, we have such an issue and have had such an issue, is that people are all trying to fit one mold. And it was almost as if we don't want any authenticity here. We just want you all to sort of do the same thing and produce the money. So I think I realized that for me, learning to become more who I was authentically not only was great for business and was in fact fantastic for business in lots of different ways, but also was very much better for my mental health and well-being than trying to pretend to be somebody that I thought I should be. So that's why I think it's
Pretending
important.
somebody else is exhausting.
Yes.
It's a lot of work. It's much easier to show up as self. I remember that one of the CEOs once in the boardroom referred to me, calling me Harvey. I don't watch a lot of TV. This is when I discovered the show, and I saw the parallels, and I was flattered and actually fell in love with him a little bit.
Yeah.
But I am also an Olga. I'm no Harvey. And so I had a moment of sort of thinking about kind of who we are, how we show up, how people actually expect lawyers to show up, how they project things at us, how we sort of respond back, and how much easier it is to just show up as Olga. And then I realized that of all the things I've done in life, I've never regretted showing up as Olga, even if it was shocking to somebody else. I personally have not had regret about it. And it sounds like you had this moment of burnout. Tell me about that moment.
So the moment, I guess there was build up to it, and I talk about this a lot because people talk about burnout as being a workplace phenomenon, and then law firms and team leaders and things can get defensive, quite understandably, and say it's not just the work, there's other things going on. And that, in my case, was absolutely true. I had my own business. There was nobody telling me what hours to work except myself. And as lawyers, we can be quite tough on ourselves. And so I'd loved the 3 or 4 years that I'd been building my business, absolutely loved it. It was almost my dream life. It was more than I'd ever expected in terms of how well the business was growing, could buy the new house, the new cars, go on the new holidays. Although I was working longer and longer hours because I was not very good at saying no, I was taking on all the possible clients. I was doing telecoms internationally at 10 o'clock at night. I had a young family, 2 boys at the time. So trying to do all those things. And then you get that phone call where my dad called to say that he'd been diagnosed with cancer. And that's the extra bit. And for me, that was the bit that pushed me as close to burnout as I hope I'll get. And panic attacks started to happen. The anxiety really went through the roof. And I know now, looking back, it had been building for a long, long time, but that was the tipping point. And I think starting to have those panic attacks, and I do very vividly remember my 2-year-old at the time being asleep upstairs, and I thought, I'm trying to run a business, I'm trying to grow a business, and I can't breathe. This isn't a thing that can go on. So that was I do remember having that realization.
Yeah, breathing is kind of mission critical, isn't it?
Yes.
Kind of helps. We have Lisa who's saying hello. She's building some really cool stuff in your neck of the. She's not exactly your neighbor. She's in Europe, but I don't believe she's in the UK. Maybe she is. I think she's somewhere in the north. So let's talk in the context of building. We see a lot of technology. Our practices are increasingly efficient, and sometimes technology can be helpful to be more authentic, and sometimes it could be an obstacle to that authenticity. I'm just curious in your coaching lawyers, to be authentic, trying to navigate this age of AI where we increasingly can practice on top of our licenses, and yet, and yet the 2-year-old sees us in the panic, and that's probably, as a parent, not just as a lawyer, is the one thing you maybe, want to be conscious of. How do you think about all that?
Oh, there's so much there. I think this is where, when I thought about how authenticity plays in with AI and the future of law, I thought it really absolutely does. Because if we think about who we are authentically, I don't know how many of us want to just work loads and loads of hours. I don't know that we do. I certainly don't think I went into law just so that I could work 18-hour days over and over and over. And especially when you do, whether it's a family or other things you want to do. And again, I know we are changing as a profession, and people are seeing this as a much more flexible career option. It's not as rigid as it used to be. But I think when you think about AI, and for years, I mean, when I was back in sort of normal big law years ago, things were starting to happen with a bit of AI, and everyone was so worried about it and so fearful of what it meant. And I think this is the problem. Lawyers traditionally have a quite risk-averse fear of change. I know a lot of us are becoming far more entrepreneurial, and it's wonderful to see. And I love to, spend a lot of time with those people. Doesn't mean we have no fear at all. I think it just means that there's something we really want, and we're going to go for it, and we're going to sort of get over that fear to get there. But I think AI generally, and any of these sorts of changes with technology, as a business owner, I believe these are fantastic for all business owners, but also for lawyers, because how much of our time goes to the client, and it's that time that's actually advising that is what is worthwhile from our perspective. It's our expertise, it's our knowledge. The file opening, the admin, the sending bills, the chasing bills, all of those sorts of things, scheduling posts on LinkedIn, whatever it is, we shouldn't be spending a lot of time doing that, because our expertise is in that moment when we're with the client, or we're advising the client, or we're acting for the client. That's where we should be spending our time, because that's where it's really valuable. And that's where technology and AI would be so fantastic for more people to get into. But I think unless they do start thinking about that fear of change, and that fear of, will I be replaced, will I not be needed anymore, that for me is the biggest hurdle that most lawyers face. And with my coaching hat on, I see it with law firm owners, I see it with individual lawyers, I see it when people want me to train teams and they're trying to deal with change and nobody wants to get on board. It's not just training them how to use the new systems, they have to be brought in so that they're not so afraid. And that sort of change takes time, especially if people have been in environments where there has been a lot of fear and a lot of change.
I find that lawyering actually a skill that helps you manage fear. That self-management piece and lawyering really go hand in hand. But I do want to go back to that authenticity. We increasingly the lines between work and play, and personal are blurred. I mean, you're literally in my house right now. in
You're in mine.
so welcome. This is you get a full disclosure of who I am as a person, what I love. I love colors, for example, and love to travel and experience humanity, in action. So what is the sort of steps? What are the 2, 3, 5 steps, I as a lawyer can take to be authentic? To understand what it means in Olga's case. What does it mean to show up as Olga? What is sort of this journey at a high level of discovering you? And then, of course, liking that.
Oh, wow, that's an interesting one, the second part. I think whenever I talk to people about this, first of all, I try and get them to, it's like with any of my training, I try to get them to buy into why it matters. Because trying to become more of our authentic self, depending on how old we are, I was 35 when I started thinking about some of these things. It's lovely when I get to talk to younger lawyers who haven't spent more years trying to be somebody else and who they think they should be. But depending on how many years we have tried to be someone else, it can take quite a long time to be brave enough to start showing more of yourself. And obviously it depends on the work environment you're in, how supportive it is, how psychologically safe, of course, it is. So the first part is, I guess, understanding how powerful it is, and that although it is scary, it is worth taking those scary steps. And something you said quite early on, Olga, is, why would we not want to be ourselves, and how much easier and, yes, better for business and every area of our life, better for relationships, all of those sorts of things authenticity is. But if it was that easy, everyone would just do it. I wouldn't have to write books about it and do trainings and do talks about it and coach people on it, because it wouldn't be that difficult. But the reason it's difficult to be authentic is because of how long we haven't been. And, for a lot of people to even think about who they are authentically. And I know your question was, how do people, how do they go about becoming more authentic? And the first step for me is, yes, understand why it's going to benefit you, because that'll give you the impetus to actually try, even when it's quite difficult and quite challenging. But actually, who is the authentic you? And I have got lots of tips for people on how to think about this. One great tip I was given that started the journey for me is, what were you like as a child, particularly around 5, 6, 7 years old, before that sense of the world sort of changed you and who you are? What was that child like? Were they creative? Did they love music and dance? Were they sociable? Were they, I was always the one at the front of the room wanting to speak to everybody. And yet I'd lost my voice as a teenager and growing up. And it's that sort of thing. What were you like before the world sort of intervened? I know that doesn't work for everyone depending on the upbringing they've had. So thinking about that, journaling is a wonderful way, just sort of writing out, holding the question, who am I? I remember sitting there one night with lots of tears, just, who is Hannah? If I'm not just a lawyer, what else am I? I've wanted to be a lawyer since I was 13 years old. I was 35 at the time. I didn't know anything else. I didn't know who else I could be or what else I could be, but I knew I didn't want to just do that. So thinking about who you were maybe when you were at your happiest, your most free, and who you want to be is an interesting one, because I always think that subconscious mind is really, really powerful, and when we let it will tell us, it will give us the answers.
Yeah, I mean, I think past is interesting. As someone who had many lives in different parts of the world, I'm really forward looking actually, and more into a question of who I want to
Mm.
become. And to me, that's a definition of sort of self sovereignty at its best. And in thinking through that, and through every pivot, and I unavoidably sort of think, well, what could I be? And then through some long conversation, I basically think, well, the range is pretty high. I could be an astronaut. So anything is possible. So in being this forward looking and kind of narrowing things, do you have any tips and tricks of how to think through, okay, this, every end is a new beginning. This stage of my life has ended. I'm looking forward to my next stage. I'm trying to identify what it is. Somewhere between, doing nothing and flying to the moon. By the way, the moon will never happen. I very much love the planet Earth. I'm a little terrified of heights. I know how to manage it, but like I am like happily here dealing with gravity on the planet Earth. So that's likely not even in the cards for me. But that aside, how do you sort of think about it? Of how do you think through all the options that are available to you? And you could be all these things, and yet you really can only live one life at a time.
Mm. I guess for me, being authentic is more than just the thing that you do, for work, for a job. It has defined us in the legal profession. And I think that's been part of what is the big issue, because we've been defined by that role, that title, in a way that then that's impacted sort of the person that we are, how we think about ourselves, and then how we think about the options. As you say, flying to the moon was never an option when you're doing that. So I think if people start thinking about I always say to people, if you don't know where you do want to be, think about the things you really don't want anymore. And I know that's where I started. I did not want to be sat at a computer all day long anymore, certainly not from 8 a.m. in the morning till 9 o'clock at night. I didn't want to not be spending time with my children and constantly telling them to be quiet when I'd left Big Law so that I could be with my children. And yet all I was doing was putting them in front of the TV and telling them to be quiet. I wanted to have more time with people. I didn't want to be at the computer with documents all the time. I wanted to have good holidays. I wanted to travel. I wanted the family to have a certain lifestyle. I looked for the things that I didn't want anymore and that I wanted to change in my life. And that's where I started. And then I say to people, I just walked around with my eyes open. And I was literally, for me, it was that absolute aha moment. I was sitting in a seminar in Manchester, and someone was talking about coaching, about self-development, self-improvement, and I was already on that journey and loved it. And I looked around and it was all lawyers and bankers, and they were all looking completely blank, and they just didn't have a clue what this guy was talking about or buy into it at all. And it was literally that epiphany moment, which was, they're not listening to him because they think he doesn't get them and he doesn't understand them. Whereas I do get them and understand them, because I've been part of this world for years and I still am. But I do still understand the benefits of personal development, coaching, all of those sorts of things. And I can be the bridge. I mean, I just remember that thought coming into my head. I can be the bridge. And that was then literally how I went on to do it. But I say to people, walk around with your eyes open, see what comes up.
Yeah. I've because I'm sort of going through a pivot now, and I've had an opportunity to talk to a lot of leaders in law I admire. Some of them are still practicing, some of them are far away from practicing, and there's a lot of folks in the middle. I've chosen to be sort of in the same stage of life as I am because I figured they sort of deal with same issues. And one of the words that keeps coming up is the word of curation. And I think that's kind of where you sort of driving toward. You can pick things that fit that vision and you sort of exclude things that don't. I find that the word curation keeps coming up a lot in this sort of life design and what do I want to be growing up conversations, and how do I optimize for happiness and the vision I have. What do you
Yes.
think about that?
Oh, it was I wouldn't have had that word in my head, but it was very similar to the train of thought I was just on there, which is, it's about opening up to those possibilities and not necessarily being fixed on what the end point looks like. As you say, it's not, I want to be the person who flies to the moon, or I want to be the person who does X, Y, Z. It's just opening up to the things that you would enjoy doing. And that was very much my journey. You know, I didn't know I was going to co-own a law firm until 2.5 years ago when somebody asked me. And I thought that was never on the plan. You know, that was, if anything, I thought I was coming out of law to build up the coaching, the speaking, and the training. But actually, when I thought about it, because of what was being offered to me and the nature of the firm and everything, I thought this is just another way for me to express helping to change the culture in law. And actually, although I'm out there trying to do it, you know, with the whole profession, through writing, through training, through education, this is an opportunity for me to help a direct firm, you know, my firm, my people, to actually recruit people, to help them change their lives, to help them be happier as lawyers, to help them see, like I saw once, that it's not one size fits all. It's not, well, if you don't do law this way, then you leave and that's the end of your career. You know, I thought that once, but to actually show people that there is another way. So like you say, it's curating.
I love that. I have a few more questions. We are coming to the end. I want to talk about sort of connection between authenticity and well-being and mental health. I do think that we're not taking good care of our people or our humans. We do give them a lot of tools and technology, and I think that's great. As a technologist, I love it, but we're not preparing our humans to thrive in the new world. We're sort of hoping that they figure out on their own, and sometimes they don't even know who they are. They don't have tools to figure out who they are, and and then we give them more tools, and sometimes more is not, you know, make it easier. So I'm just curious, in that identifying kind of how to show up as yourself, having tools to show up authentically, how does that affect well-being and mental health and law?
Well, I think with the right tools and the right AI, you can get far more done in a shorter space of time. ChatGPT, one example, one of my favorites, when I'm doing some business coaching and saying to people, you know, put some more blogs out, do some more articles on LinkedIn. They haven't got time, they haven't got ideas. Now use ChatGPT, but bring your authentic touch to it. They'll give you ideas, they'll give you the first go, they'll give you a bit of a structure, a bit of a prompt, but then you bring your authentic voice and who you are authentically to it. And I think there's so many tools out there that, because they can make our lives easier and help us to do things more quickly, that is one of the massive ways we can help improve mental health and well-being. Because overwork, over hours, that's been the badge of honor for years in the profession, is what is driving these things up. It's not the only thing. I'm not going to say it's the only thing. The mindsets, the fact we never switch off, the fact we never say no, are all part of it. But actually, the more we can encourage people to do their best work, that advice to the client or that meeting or that networking or whatever, bring their best work, their best authentic self to it, but then use the tools to be able to rest more, have their downtime, spend it with their families, learn, grow, whatever it is. That's the way to do it. That's the way that AI makes our lives easier. But the thing we have to get over first, which I know we've talked about, is if it's our people and we're trying to empower them to use these tools, yes, we want to train them and help them to be able to do it. But more than that, we have to help them to see that this is not about replacing them or pushing them out. This isn't something for them to be afraid of. This is something that helps them harness their expertise and their brilliance and spend their time focusing on that, but actually to still get all these other wonderful things done as well.
Yeah, yeah. I recently I automated a lot of parts of my life, and it actually made a lot of me a lot happier, a lot more authentic, and frankly, just more satisfied with life. I was recently sharing kind of what I've done with my one of my business partners, and she said, "Oh wow, huh. So I'm not sure if I'm interacting with you or a clone of you." Anyway, the next email I wrote her, I attached a PDF where I actually included a handwritten table, and she was really excited because she felt like she got a human touch until she realized that she couldn't, like, she really struggled reading my handwriting. I use Cyrillic letters. And
Oh,
so for the Western audience, and Anglo-Saxon American audience, it's a struggle to read through what looks like a work of art, but impossible to read. So, so I do think she basically told me in not so few words that she does prefer a clone of me. So there you go. Let's talk about the leadership in law firms and how this authenticity affects, where we're going, especially in the age of AI.
Just hugely. I mean, it was lovely to be involved in this book. Is actually the second or third collaboration I think I've done for Globe Law and Business, and one of them was around practice group leaders. And I did so much research asking people what makes a great practice group leader, and everything that came back was about emotional intelligence. It was not about the best rainmaker, the best biller, the best technical lawyer. None of that came back at all. It was all about emotional intelligence. And for me, emotional intelligence, the definition I'd use in training is that you recognize and understand your own emotions, and you recognize and understand their impact on other people. And also I'd add to that, being able to hopefully read people quite well, so you can see when your team is stressed, or you can see when they're upset, maybe sometimes even before they realize it, etc. But to really get to your own emotions, and then to be able to ask people how they are, and really be present and really listen in a way that they trust you quite quickly and quite easily as a leader, is authenticity. Because for me, if we're not authentic, people, whether they realize it or not, it's like an animal part of our brain. It shuts down. It doesn't trust because there's something that it's fearful of. It can't really see that person, and it can't really trust that person until there is more openness and more authenticity. So for me, leaders who want to get the very best, sounds awful to say the very best from their people, but to encourage their people to bring their best self and their best brilliance to work, is be more authentic, be more you, because whoever that is, it's not to say one way is right, but be more authentic, and they will trust you and they will open up to you.
Last question. So I'm graduating from law school, and we see folks graduate from law school who are not that junior. This may be their second and third career. They've seen some lawyers on TV. They see Harvey, my favorite lawyer. They see folks who come to their law school and give talks. They see their professors. How do they find themselves in that, you know, full of examples yet very noisy world?
How do they find themselves? I really like that. I always say to people, it's not about being that clone or that carbon copy. There's nothing wrong with looking for a role model, though, especially if you are finding your way and finding your feet in this world. And I do totally appreciate that for senior people, it's far easier to be authentic than it is for juniors, but that's not that it's impossible. It's a journey. We're not either totally authentic or totally not. It's a curve, it's a journey. But I think looking for those role models that we do really look up to, because maybe we do see something of ourselves in them, or we see something in them that we like. There's something about the way they do things that we respect and we appreciate, and actually we'd like to have a part of that ourselves. I think that's a really good start for those people who are brand new to it. Maybe they've had, as you say, it might be their second career. It wasn't my second career, but I'd still spent years supervising and managing in pubs and restaurants and shops and things. And I brought that experience, that team leadership and camaraderie and client service, to being a lawyer. So people may have skills that they've used, in the home as part of their family, or as part of charity work, or work they've done before they come to law. All of these skills are what really make us great lawyers that are going to stand out. And in the day of AI and increasing use of AI, how do lawyers keep their jobs? They are themselves. They bring themselves. They bring something extra. They bring something different, because you can't emulate that.
Yeah. Well, Hannah, thank you so much for this inspiring conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And thank you so much for contributing to this book, The Legal Operations in the Age of AI and Data. You're one of almost 50 amazing leaders worldwide who are helping the community to embrace the digital transformation and change management. And I really love your message of authenticity. We covered a lot of ground, a lot of tips, a lot of personal stories. What is one takeaway you want folks to get from this conversation?
What I'd really like to actually share as a sort of final tip for people, because it's come up so much in conversations recently, when people talk to me about being nervous about networking, business development, building their own client relationships, and this can be junior and senior lawyers, is harness AI, whether it's using ChatGPT to draft up some posts, articles, messages, whatever it is, do those things. But then go and see the people as well. Go and talk to people, go and meet people, and try not to be nervous about it. Go as you would go to a family wedding or a friend's party or a coffee with a friend. It's just a conversation. It's just making friends. And then you can use some of the AI tools to do the follow-ups, to keep in touch, to make it easier for you when your time poor. But it's something that the sooner we start in our career, I wish I'd started it sooner. I absolutely love it. It's what makes the job of being a lawyer a great job for me, great career, is the networking, is the meeting people, is the building relationships. And so the sooner you can do that in your career, the better, I would say.
Well, thank you so much for joining. Thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, Hannah. Thank you, everyone, for being part of it and joining us as well. I'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for stopping by. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Notes to My Legal Self. The future belongs to builders. Know someone who'd make a great guest? Let us know. Self-nominations are encouraged. They're an act of courage. Keep in mind, the future of law is all lit up. Let's roll up our sleeves, innovate, build, and change the world of law together. See you soon.